Welcome back to this continuing series of lectures and the principles of macroeconomics. We are going to cover topic, I believe it is 12 today. Let's take a look at that. Macroeconomic questions. Yes. The last lecture was over topic 11 on disequilibrium, and in fact, that completed our introductory lectures on microeconomics principles, the basic ones that are needed for our understanding of the macroeconomic theory and principles that follow starting today. So this first topic is over inflation and how it's measured. And we're going to focus on the Consumer Price Index, which is the most heard about and publicized measure of average prices. There are other measures that are preferred by economists in their analysis, but this is the one that is in the news most frequently and which is used to adjust prices so they can be compared over time and adjust income so you can see whether or not your income is keeping up with inflation, or to compare your income today with an income at some earlier period. So let's get started. Let's open up the PowerPoints, and I have them already open. And actually, I don't really start. Let's scroll down, I think, to right here. The measure of prices and CPI. I guess we should go over the first 13 very quickly because since this is the beginning of the macroeconomics part of this Principles of Macroeconomics course, a brief introduction is appropriate. And so the study of macroeconomics is about economic problems like inflation, deflation, unemployment, business cycles, recessions, slow economic growth, these type of things. Macroeconomic theories. Well, there are many of them, but basically we can group them into two basic categories. Interventionist and non-interventionist. So the non-interventionist is basically what we might call free market or laissez-faire, and it believes that the economy is a natural functioning like organism and will come to an equilibrium if given time to do so, and that the government is mainly a night watchman that should keep the rules and apply them to everyone, but not intervene too much beyond that. That is basically what's called classical economic theory. It predominated amongst economists really from the time of Adam Smith, about the time of the American Revolution, up until, say, World War I, and actually the Great Depression. But big parts of the interventionist machinery were, in fact, passed into law in the United States in 1913 in the Woodrow Wilson administration. So the interventionist ones then would be basically ideas surrounding John Maynard Keynes and the idea that markets will not come into equilibrium quickly, if at all, and the government needs to intervene to help the market system establish full employment with stable prices. So there are many different theories under each of these, and there are some that overlap in both, but that is the outlines in general that we'll be following in this introductory course. The macroeconomic policies are, well, of course, we've already outlined them for the classical economists, that the government is a night watchman. It provides the basic rules of the game and the umpires to keep things fair and on the level. But the interventionists are going to use government spending and taxing policies called fiscal policy to try to help the economy perform better, and also monetary policy to help it perform better. Both of these, of course, were important to the classicals, but again, monetary policy was to be carried out prudently with prudent expansion of credit as the economy grew, and of course, prudent expenditure and tax policies so as not to hinder its growth. Interventionists will engage in deficit spending and rapid increases in credit if we find ourselves in dire economic times like the Great Depression or the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. Different views on how the economy works. We've covered that already. Oh, here are the problems again: inflation, unemployment, interest rates, low economic growth. I guess we could insert here recessions during the business cycle. Economic theories will help explain changes in output of all goods and services, something that we're going to label real GDP soon enough. And related to that, changes in the total income, total incomes earned. This is going to be labeled national income. We'll get to that not too far into the future. Changes in price levels, that's the average of all prices, a measure of inflation, and that's what this one starts talking about, the consumer price index. Changes in the unemployment rate and maybe the population employment rate or the civilian labor participation rate, labor force participation rate. We're going to cover those in topics 14 and 15. Changes in the interest rates, which really takes up the last third of the course with monetary policy. I've already talked about the two basic groups of interventionist policies: fiscal policy and monetary policy. And of course, throughout explaining all of this, we will be taking a look at the two different views to intervene or to not intervene. The PQ category. So this is basically, it may seem familiar because, let me go to draw, and I guess I'll use a black one. Basically, we just got finished talking about the market system, P and Q, and we're going to use the same sort of model. But instead of this P representing price per unit of a particular good, it's going to represent the price level or the average of all goods, or I guess for us, the CPI. And Q, instead of representing the quantity of all goods and services, is going to represent total physical output of all goods and services. And we're going to call this real GDP, and I hope it's okay to use these initials. Right now it's not that important, but this represents gross domestic product, okay? And I'm not going to draw the whole model. I'll just put this in. Before we called this, demand, I almost got ahead of myself, that we're going to call it AD now. Aggregate demand. Aggregate just means we're going to add together the demand for all goods: apples, oranges, shoelaces, cars, haircuts, beauty salon services, etc. The aggregate demand for all goods and services. Anyway, we're going to do that. And of course, we come back to this, self-regulating or not, effective and ineffective. Next topic, the PQ. This is basically what I just talked about: price level and real GDP, P and Q. And so I'm just looking out my window, seeing what's happening here. But sorry for the interruption. All right, P and Q. So Q is connected to gross domestic product, as is P. Unemployment is connected to how much output is being produced. Q, inflation, is connected to P. Deflation to price level to P. Economic growth is how quickly Q is changing. Stagflation is a rising price level with rising unemployment, which is really something we really haven't seen since the 1970s. But that was such a traumatic decade that we keep it in mind. It could happen again. Business cycles, up and down swings of Q or real GDP, inflationary gap, where the economy is at full employment, but prices are rising rapidly. Recessionary gap is where the economy is below full employment, and we have high unemployment. Fiscal policy is concerned with stabilizing price levels and bringing us back to full employment, as is monetary policy. I'm doing this quickly, and here is a quote from a famous Swedish economist, but I think we can skip over that. Are these policies effective or not? We'll briefly talk about that. All right, so that does it with our quick and dirty introduction to macro. And now here is where we start the macro topics. Oops, forgot that. See. All right, so we're going to talk about the price level. We're going to graph on the vertical axis, which is a weighted average of prices of all goods and services. The price index is used for this, and the one we're going to study is the consumer price index, which is a widely cited index number for a price level. It's a weighted average of prices of a specific set of goods and services, and purchased by the typical or average household. The deal here is that this is all goods and services, and the consumer price index really basically, and we'll get to this later in the lecture, covers only approximately 63% of all prices, okay? And we'll show you why that's the case soon enough. All indexes have a base year. The consumer price index has a base year of, I think, yeah, it's 1982 to 1984. I know that's like several years. But basically, the index number will be 100, and it is 100, if I can remember correctly, in July of 1983. So basically, that's not only the base year, but the base month. Okay? And we'll talk about that base in a moment. In fact, right now, here's how the consumer price index is computed is, okay, this is the base year, and say this is the current year. So let's say this is what did I say, 83, and this is 9/20, 2020, this is 1983. And here's the market basket that we put together based upon, a survey of consumers about what they're buying. And notice that this market basket is fixed. It doesn't change. We're going to price how much this market basket cost almost 40 years later, and we'll see how much prices have changed during that period of time. So in the base year, 83, a pen costs 20 cents a piece. So we're buying 10 pens, we're paying $2 for them. Shirts cost $7 a piece. Buying 5 of them means we're spending $35, let's say, a year. And shoes cost $10 a pair. We buy 3 of them, so that's 30. We're spending $67 a year for this basket of goods. Okay, same basket, almost, what is this, 37 years later. And now pens cost 70 cents a piece, shirts $14 a piece, and pairs of shoes $30 a piece. Doing the multiplications, pens now altogether cost $7, shirts $70, and shoes $90. So now we're paying $167 for the same amount of goods, assuming that the quality is the same. So now we enter the 167 total expenditure and market basket in current year, and we enter the 67 here, total dollar expenditure in the base year, and take it times 100. So that's 167 over 67 times 100, 249. Okay, now basically, how shall I do this? Let me think. How about the CPI in the base year? So that would equal, let's just say, for example, here would be the prices in the current year times the quantity in the base year, the basket, and in the denominator, it's the price in the base year times the quantity in the base year, right? And so if the CPI in the base year is going to be the price in the base year times the quantity of the basket in the base year over the price in the base year times the quantity in the base year times 100. And obviously this here is 1 times 100 gives us an index number of 100 in the base year, okay? So it's 100 in the base year and 249 in the current year. So if prices hadn't changed, had been completely constant over that period, we'd still have a index of 100. So that would mean no inflation at all. If prices had doubled, that would mean this the dollar expenditure in the market basket in the current year would be twice as much here. So times 100, that would give us 200. So basically prices have more than doubled here. So essentially you can subtract 100 from this to get how much the percentage increase in prices over this period of time, which would be 149%, okay? All right, let's come on. Oh, now we get to these. And here's a nice video I went over in lecture, but let's do it again because it summarizes everything so succinctly and nicely. And where did I open that up? I think it's here. Where is that video? Here it goes. Yeah, I already have it.
The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is considered the benchmark inflation guide for the U.S. economy. It uses a basket of goods approach that aims to compare a consistent base of products from year to year, focusing on products that are bought and used by consumers daily. The price of your milk, eggs, toothpaste, and haircut are all captured in the CPI. The CPI is calculated by taking price changes for each item in the preset basket of goods and averaging them, with the goods being weighted according to their importance. The index uses a base year for comparability of its calculations, so changes will often be provided on a percentage basis to reflect only changes to prior index levels. There are two CPI figures, the CPI for urban wage earners and clerical workers, the CPIW, and the CPI for all urban consumers, the CPI-U. The most watched metric is the CPI-U, which is often presented with a seasonal adjustment, as consumer patterns vary depending on the time of year. The CPI is a detailed release with breakouts for most major consumer groups and geographical regions. The CPI is also used to identify periods of inflation or deflation. Large rises in CPI during a short stretch typically signal periods of inflation, and large drops in CPI during a short period usually mark periods of deflation. As well, the CPI is used to make changes to cash flow mechanisms such as pensions, Medicare, and cost of living adjustments. This versatility means the CPI affects nearly every market and person in America.
Okay, good deal. So that does sort of summarize everything not quite everything. What is the CPI? How is it constructed? And why is it so important to so many people in the United States? A nice little video. We're going to get to all of those in here pretty quickly. I would like to visit the Bureau of Labor Statistics, government bureau. We're going to be using it extensively along with the St. Louis Federal Reserve Economic Database. But let's visit the BLS right now. And I've opened it up already here in Microsoft Edge because I can draw on these web pages. Okay, so essentially under subjects, you'll see the things we're going to be interested in are the Consumer Price Index, and you'll see that they have a number of other indexes: Producer Price Index, Import-Export Price Indexes, Employment Cost Index, and they also have data on national unemployment and actually employment rates and state and local unemployment rates. So a lot of information about employment and pay. So the employment has to do with Q, inflation and prices, of course, P. And we'll be getting a lot of our data from this government site, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, okay? And let's see what we have here. 12-month percentage change in consumer price index. Yeah, I think later on we're going to be doing something about the price of gasoline and notice how far energy costs, especially oil and gasoline, have fallen. They were falling before the coronavirus because of oversupply of oil in the world, which was pushing prices of oil and gas way down. And then, of course, the demand itself fell out, dropped. The floor dropped out of it with the governmentally mandated social distancing lockdown policies it had. But the whole index and the food index have increased 4.1, 1.3. This is all the categories minus energy and food, up 1.7. All right. And this is the one I'm really interested in because it contains information about what the CPI is and how it's constructed. So if we go back to this, yeah, the link is right here. Questions and answers, FAQ 1 through 11 will answer parts A and B of topic 11, number 5 for part C, number 22 for part D, along with sections 3 and 5 of Wikipedia. I think we'll quickly go through these. So all of them are here. I simply define it as a measure of the average change over time in prices. Whoops, I do have to turn on the writing one. And indeed, we saw in our previous example, when the index went from 100 to 249, I basically said that meant there was a 149% increase in the price level, okay? So the index number measures average change, percentage change over time, if you can read it that way. And how is it put together? Well, there are a number of components to it. There are 2 surveys. One survey is the consumer expenditure surveys. So one like consumer expenditure, and notice it's plural. And this, determines the so-called basket of goods whose prices will be followed. And so basically, this is broken into 2 parts. And I think they talk about one part here. So about 24 consumers were surveyed in these 2 years. I guess 24,000 in 1 year and 24 more in the second year. That's how you get the 48,000 here. And those 24,000 people were interviewed 4 times each year. And they provided information on the major expenditure categories, that they would remember, like mortgages, rent, utility costs, things of that nature. And then there was a second survey, which is a diary survey. So there's the interview survey, which over a 2-year period interviews 24,000 in 1 year, 24 more in another year, for 48,000 interviews. And then there's the diary, okay? And this is basically 12,000 people in each year, or 24,000 over 2 years. They're asked to keep diaries for 2 weeks for a period of time so that you can get the small items and figure out exactly how important they are. So that's how the basket is formed, okay? And then there is the, I'm not sure what we are going to call this. I've forgotten. I think the second part of the survey is that's supposed to be a E, collection of price data. Collection of price data that's used to figure out, how much is spent on the basket. And these actually, I think this is broken up into two parts too, an A and a B part. And basically people might actually go to grocery stores and department stores, or they might use the telephone to interview the managers of the stores, or they might use the internet. So all three of these are used to gather prices of items in the basket. Then for B, there are actually interviews. Sorry about the phone ringing all the time. This is, I'm giving this lecture, about 43 days before the presidential election, and we are just inundated with phone calls from candidates and their workers looking for donations and to persuade us to vote for one or the other, okay? So interviews, and basically this is mainly for determining rental equivalent prices for owner-occupied homes, and also the rent that people are paying. So basically that's it. And so then let's see, how is CPI calculated? The CPI is a product of a series of interrelated samples. First, using data from the US Census, we select urban areas. Next, another sample of about 14,500 families each year serves as the basis for telephone point of purchase survey. So basically, I didn't even include that survey in here. They're trying to figure out, where people are buying things so that they can go to those places to collect prices, okay? And here is how it's used, and basically it's used as an economic indicator for policymakers, especially legislators and the president are very sensitive to this because this is what consumers know is happening. The central bank, the Federal Reserve, is also looking at it, though they are much more interested in the GDP deflator as an index, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's also used as a deflator of other economic series. From, like if we're looking at income people earn over a 20-year period, like if I went back and listed all of my adjusted gross income every year for the past 20 years, I would see a huge rise in it, but most of that's because of inflation. So we could use the CPI to deflate that series using the base year So then only the real change in my income would be shown from year to year, not the change due to inflation. Um, and it's a means of adjusting dollar values. So I think we're going to take a look at in just a bit, like the price of gasoline, and maybe we'll do it for income too. Um, so, like if the price of gasoline right now is $2, how much would that be in 1996 dollars? And I think I have an example in the PowerPoint coming up with that. And whose buying habits? Well, they try to make sure that everyone is represented proportionally by geographic region, by age of household, by ethnicity, by race, by sex, um, family structure, children present or not. And they publish all sorts of data, not only for the whole country, but for each region. And I forget how many metropolitan areas they have. I think it'll be towards the bottom of this FAQ. Here's a very important thing for Part C. Why is it so important? Well, the Social Security Administration has this for their cost of living adjustment for Social Security payments. All right. And I'm not sure how many people receive Social Security. I think I just read somewhere it's as many as 50 million people. I'm thinking, wow, that's a huge chunk of the population. But we are getting older as a population. It's saying it's not really a cost of living index because we're just using index numbers and we're averaging the whole country. And it is true that as an average, you know, the same average is used in Austin as in New York City or San Francisco. And obviously, the cost of living in those places is much higher, but they have disaggregated into metropolitan areas, and each has their own index. I shouldn't say Austin metropolitan area does. It wasn't large enough when they started doing this to be included, though it seems like it may be larger than some of the metropolitan areas in it now, such as Baltimore or Detroit. Uh, so I wonder if they'll ever change that. Um, and what goods does it cover? We're going to look at that in more detail soon, but the major categories are food and beverages, housing, shelter cost, apparel, clothing, and other services related to that, transportation cost, cost of automobiles, gasoline, maintenance, that type of thing, auto insurance, medical care, its cost and what it's paid for out of pocket, recreation, from taking vacations to going to the movies and going out. Well, going out to eat is included over here in food and beverages. Education, which is important to you all. Um, Education and communication and other goods and services. Okay. So they talk about how the prices are collected. U.S. data collectors visit in person or on the web or call thousands of retail stores, service establishments, rental units, and doctors' offices all over the United States to obtain information on the prices of thousands of items. Wow, okay, here is something I was looking for. They collect prices on about 80,000 items each month, okay? Woof. Yeah, I guess I didn't want to see that list, but it would be quite long. So, all right. And anything else here? Okay. How do I interpret the index? I don't think escalation. Da, 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 da. Oh, here are the major metropolitan areas. I don't want to count them. I don't know. Austin isn't in here, but there are two in Texas. Dallas and Houston are included. Austin, San Antonio is not. There are separate indexes for each of these metropolitan areas. All right, so now here's FAQ on limitations. And basically, they say limitations and application because they're not certain absolutely that they're, well, that it's applicable to all population groups. And it is true that there is difference in the behavior of various ethnic groups. Some are very parsimonious and save a huge amount. Others don't save as much, and they spend all of their money and enjoy life, I guess. Even though we can't say the people who are saving a lot aren't enjoying life. That's their values. So it's, in other words, this, we're going to come to this over and over again. This is an average value, okay? So there's a distribution around the average. Nobody probably is right at the average, okay? So some people are below it, some people are above it. I don't know. They used to joke, and this is when people had more children, that each family had 2.3 children. Well, of course, you can't have 0.3 of a child. That's an average. You either had more or less than that. But now I think it must be down to about 1.6 children. I should look that up. I should know that number. I don't know it right off the top of my head. And then there are limits in measurement, and there are sampling errors. Maybe they get the basket wrong, but probably not. They sample so many people, 24,000 each time, and then 48,000 together in a 2-year period. That's a huge number of people. Actually, this number of people is probably even greater if you're counting households, because if they interview 24,000 households, there's probably on average 2 people in every household, eh? Maybe less, I don't know, but it would be more. But here, and we're going to talk about weaknesses, and this is where the real weaknesses come. Obviously, I hadn't really emphasized before this year problems in data collection, but basically with the coronavirus pandemic, visits to stores and person-to-person visits to interview people on their buying habits or their rental payments has stopped. So I wonder how this is impacting the data going into it. But the other big ones are difficulties in defining basic concepts and their operational implementation. Yeah, that's such, I guess you need a translation book. Basically, I think what they're referring to here are two things. Well, I think we'll leave the second one for the quality changes. But how to do shelter cost? This is really difficult thing to do correctly. And maybe it can't even ever be done correctly. It's just something very, very smart statisticians and economists have been wrestling with for at least 50 years, if not more, since the great inflation of the 70s. How they calculated shelter cost contributed to the inflation rate probably being higher than it really was. And then how they changed it, then that turned out to probably underestimate inflation in the aughts. In other words, from 2000 to 2008, when the housing bubble occurred. The second one is, how do you handle quality changes? In other words, changes due to technology. And of course, here you have the example of computers and communication equipment. But there have been all sorts of improvements in quality. I mean, like, wow, you don't even have to go to a movie theater to view a movie anymore. And I know as long as 40 years ago, you could rent, videos from stores, but now you can stream them. And flat screen TVs, high definition TVs, all the bells and whistles in modern cars, housing, the square footage in housing has improved, air conditioning and heating efficiency has improved. So many quality improvements. How do you carry on comparing what's in the basket now to a basket in earlier years? You can see there are really some big challenges in creating this basket of goods. All right, so that does it for that part of the lecture. What else do we need? I think I'm going to skip over the Wikipedia part, and let's take a look at the relative weights. I think I have that in here somewhere. Where would that be? Is it here? No, here. I did want to say that I looked up the tax brackets for this coming tax year. Let me be able to draw this. So next spring I'll be dealing with this. These here are marginal tax rates. All right. And we're going to take a look at this a little bit because this is a source of great confusion. Basically, up here it says on a yearly basis, IRS adjusts more than 40 tax provisions for inflation. This is another reason why the CPI is so important to the people of the United States. It's important to everyone who receives Social Security. It's important to everyone who pays taxes. It's important to everyone who receives any sort of welfare payments from states or the national government. So starting next year, they're going to improve how it's adjusted, the tax brackets. But let's take a look at this. Let's just say how income of a household is equal to $100,000. Now, a mistake many students look at and say, well, this bracket goes from 0 to 9,875, this to 40, this to 85. So really, it would be 24% of 100,000 or 24,000. And that is incorrect. So let's just say this is your adjusted income on a tax form. Basically, someone making 100,000, and for ease of calculation, let's make these brackets easier. Let's make this 40,000. Let's make this 85,000. Okay. And so really 100,000 is in here somewhere. So they're going to pay 10% on the first 10,000. So that's 10K times 10%. So that they're going to pay $1,000 tax on that. And then they're going to go from 10,000 to 40,000. So that's another 30K. And on that next 30K, they're going to pay 12%. So that's $1,200 times 3. That's $3,600. And then they go from, this starts at 40,000 to 85,000, so another 45,000. They're going to pay at the 22% rate. And, well, let me just think about this. 10% is 4,500, so 20% would be 9,000. I need to get my pen and pencil out. So 9,000, what's 2%? So 10% is 4,500. And so 1% would be 452% would be 900. So it'd be 9,900. I hope I got that right. My brain is slow. I should be able to do that in my head. 9,900. And where are we at? We've got 75, 85. So we have 100,000. So from 85,000 to 100, that'll take us to 15,000 more, and all the income is up. But that's at the 24% rate, and 10% of 15,000 is 1,500. So 5% is 750, and so we have two 10%. So that's 3,750. All right. Come on. Where's my pen? 3,750. And we added this up to 0. We add that up. That's 5. 16. Whoops. 22. Put down the 2. Carry the 2. 5. 14. 17. 18. $18,250 is the amount of tax that someone who has adjusted gross income of 100,000 would pay, or about 18.2. So their average tax rate is 18.25. Whoops, not dollars, but percent. And so it's so even though they're in the 24% tax rate, they are not paying $24,000. They're only paying this because of the marginal rate. So what happens with the CPI is they adjust all of these brackets, okay, up if we have inflation. There we go. Good deal. So we've covered that. Let's get back to our PowerPoint. And here are the index numbers from 96. And I think we're going to be using right from the end of the year in 96. Now to this number. And I think I got this from the textbooks, earlier edition. We don't have to depend upon it. We can go over here and go to, I went under subjects, consumer price index, and we can go to CPI data and go to databases. And here is the database for all urban consumers. And let's just do the US city average of the whole United States. And by the way, this whole index started well over 100 years ago, 1913. You can go and you can get all of the CPI from the beginning of 1913 to today. Let's take a look at the base year where it's 100. Ooh, it looks like it's right in here, which is, what column is that? Yeah, it's July. July of 83, basically. is where the 100 is, and 159.9 is the most recent. Okay. And here's a graph I wish I could get right now if I go on to the Fed, and we're going to be using the Federal Reserve Economic Database from the St. Louis Fed quite frequently from now on in the course. They go back to 1913, but actually the farthest I can go back is about 1948. I think we can go and see that in the Fed. Oh, you know what? I like these graphs better than the one from the BLS. By the way, these gray areas here are recessions. All right. Notice this big one here. That's the Great Depression. Here is the Great Recession from 2008 and 9. And notice here is the end of World War II. And then we had a quick series of brief recessions, then starting with the Kennedy administration, which were interventionists, and the Keynesians like to talk about this as evidence for their policies being effective. And you can see the number of recessions has been much less frequent than right after World War II, but especially, before World War II. Look at all of those. Wow. So we'll need to talk about that later in the course. All right. And here is Formula 1 that you'll need to memorize and use on the test. And this is to calculate the inflation rate. All right. So you get the CPI in a later year minus CPI in earlier year divided by the earlier times 100 gives you the percentage change. And they have this example from your textbooks, PowerPoints. It's 193 in 2000, 195.3 in 2005, 201.6. Let's use red. So this is 201.6. This is 195.3. 195.3. So this is going to equal 6. What is this? 0.3? 201.6, 195.3. So if it were without the decimal points, it would be 6. This is bigger than this. It's 6.3 all over 195.3. Well, that's almost 6 over 200. So it's, a little bit over 3%. Or a little bit. It's around 3% times 100. Let's quickly do that. So we're going to go 6.3 divided by 195.3, and we get 3.2. Okay. Times 100 would be 3.2. Inflation over that year. And we can compare prices across time by using this formula right here. And notice that this is a ratio and this is a ratio. So let's say we're trying to figure out how much we pay for a gallon of gasoline today would cost if we adjusted it to the price level prevalent in 96. I'm just going to round it up to $2. I've been paying $1.79, $1.89 per gallon. We'll round it up to $2. The CPI today, which we just saw from the BLS site, is 259, as we saw, and we could check that on the BLS site. The end of the year 96 was 158.6. So basically, you have here say unknown in 96 over 158.6 over $2 over 259.9. And so then you can cross multiply to get rid of this. In other words, taking 158.6, which is right here, and multiplying it times this, divided by 259, and now the unknown, which is here, it's just on that side. And so it equals about $1.22 would be the equivalent price of $2 back then. And I can't remember. That's 24 years ago. Oh my goodness. I'm going to say it's probably more like $2.50 was the price of gasoline back then. So I think the price in real terms has fallen tremendously, thanks to a number of things. Thanks to fracking earlier a decade ago, thanks to the coronavirus. Every cloud has a silver lining. I'm not sure I can say that, but I just did. I guess if I get sick of the coronavirus, I will find out that it has a very dark lining too. And I'm not going to go through this calculation. We can change nominal income to a base year. And this basically is the same formula as this one up here. It's just you can't recognize it really. But let's do this 100K business again. Let's say the income this year is 100K. Let's use the CPI for this year, 259.9. And let's see, and this is really the real income in dollars of July 1983, because that's a base year. When CPI equals 100. There it is. All right. Okay, let's just do that calculation as quickly. And I had done this, but did I have it? I think it's 38,000. Let's do that calculation again. So oh no, I did something wrong. Let's do that again. 100,000 divided by 259.9. Oh yes, I'm not reading the decimal point. Now times 100 is 38,000. I forget what it was, 38,000 something. 476. So 100,000 today would have been the same as 38,476 in 83, which is, well, 80 is 40 years ago, so 37 years ago. So this is deflating a series so we can compare. You can think, well, if in 1983 you could go back and see your tax returns and you were making 25,000, well, then you've had a real increase in income from only 25,000 to 38,000. Doesn't sound as impressive as 25,000 to 100,000, but I guess that's why economists are often referred to as a dismal science. Implicit price deflator versus a consumer price deflator. Okay, yeah. And the big thing is all goods and services are included in the GDP deflator. And I usually just call it the GDP deflator. And the CPI is just a group. Let me come back. Let's go to blue. So I know I haven't introduced this yet, but very briefly, we're going to define the gross domestic product as all household consumption plus all investment spending on machinery, computer equipment, communication equipment, transportation equipment, in other words, capital equipment, plus all government spending on goods and services, no transfer payments, but it does include payment for services the government pays for, plus exports minus imports. This is net exports. And the CPI covers about 90% of C up here. Okay, whoops. All right. C is about 70% of GDP. So 90% of 70%. So CPI covers about 63% of what the GDP deflator does. Okay. All right. Why is it so important to so many people? And we've pretty much gone over this. It's important in deflating nominal prices like income we just saw. It's used to measure inflation, which is important to politicians and to the central bank in determining policy. Thirdly, it's used to adjust pay, like my pay. The Board of Trustees takes a look at inflation as best they can in our area, hoping to keep my pay up to what it bought last year, even though this last year they didn't give me anything because of the coronavirus and the drop in revenues they were expecting. And to adjust welfare payments, to adjust Social Security payments, as we saw, to unions when they negotiate their contracts have escalator clauses. They're in there. Regular contracts like building highways, say when they built 183A, tollway, the contractor had an escalator clause in it so that the amount paid to the contractor went up with inflation. And as we saw, federal tax brackets are adjusted. So almost everyone is impacted by the CPI. And I think that's it for that one. And what are some of its weaknesses? And we've went through this, like technological improvements, computers, telephones, TVs, cameras, automobiles, shopping. The basket of goods people buy change through time. I sort of mentioned this. How do we compare what people bought 100 years ago to what is in our basket now? There is always a substitution bias in the sense that even if they change it every 2 years, if the price of some product really skyrockets, like beef, let's say beef doubles, all hamburgers, steaks, everything. Well, people aren't going to buy as much as they did before, but in the basket, the quantity is going to remain the same. So the doubled price of beef times the quantity bought before is going to overstate how much we're spending on beef because we're going to substitute out of beef to fish, chicken, beans and cornbread. So that's what's called a substitution bias. Um, Shelter costs are terribly difficult. I've sort of covered this earlier, and you can see Wikipedia. I haven't tested that link. I hope it works. But if you go to the Consumer Price Index, I think it's still there. They have a long section about the difficulties in estimating shelter cost. And then, of course, there's a bit idea that workers, middle class workers, have seen their pay decrease because of inflation. That they're actually worse off now than they were in the 70s. And I'm not sure that's the case, though I'm not sure it isn't the case. But I do know that I can argue that on one side of it, and I can argue on the other side that they are worse off. Briefly, I may touch on this later, but I think I've told you that I grew up until I graduated high school in northern Illinois, about 90 miles west of Chicago. It was an agricultural area, but an industrial area too. There were factories, large and small, all over the landscape. So it wasn't like an exclusively agricultural area. Even in small towns, there would be several manufacturers uh, going strong. Most of that, not all of it. I think in the small town I grew up in, there were, I think, one pretty large factory and probably 4 medium-sized factories and 1 small factory. Now there's only 1 medium-sized factory left going. So the reason I can say, just from my sense, I have no data on this, but my eye, in other words, what you're going to believe, your eyes, or your lying eyes, or the data. When I went back at the turn of the century, 2000, the sense of poverty there that was never there before was palpable. It's gotten better since, so I guess eventually the markets do adjust. But let's go to why that maybe that's not, and that's where we go to. If I can find this Federal Reserve PDF, here we go. And I was just going through this. Whoops. Nope. I got off on the wrong browser. Where is this? This is from over 20 years ago and was done by the Federal Reserve Bank, not in St. Louis, but in Dallas. And they talk about the declining real cost of living in America. So this is data on the other side of the argument. Here's a president at the time of the Dallas Fed. And basically what they're going to do is take the average manufacturing wage, say in earlier years, and see how much time it would cost, let's say in 1897, to buy these various goods, and then take the average wage in 97 when this work was published and see how much it would cost, the equivalent cost would be based upon the average wage in 97. And these are the way costs, and you can see some of them are huge. 100 pounds of 16 penny nails at $151. I'm not sure of that cost, but I'm pretty sure you can get it for much less. Well, this is 20 years on further. Aluminum pan, you can get those very cheaply. Telephone, and here we're talking about landlines in the home. In 1997, it was like $1,200. Now you can get landlines in the home for $20 current wages. In terms of back then, it's almost nothing. Upright piano, yeah, very high. And so here is like how you take a basket of actual food and price it in terms of how long you'd have to work to buy it. You can see that it's been plunging over the last century. Well, not quite a century here. A 3-pound chicken, the amount of time you have to work for the average worker to buy it has been decreasing. Here's the different types of homes available to people, the average type of home, and you can see that's done great improvement. And the hours you have to work per square foot has been dropping a bit, and the amenities in it have been improving as well as the square footage. But the median hours per square foot is about the same. The cost of electricity for 100 kilowatts of electricity has fallen from 1902 to 1997. It's almost zero. Amazing stuff. And it just goes on and on. Levi's, automobiles, they talk about how many hours you'd have to work to get these various automobiles. You can see that using the average manufacturing wage, it fell pretty dramatically from 08 to 65, and still further from 55 to 97. And then all of these things, even from 69, were introduced, and so many are close to 100%, from windshield wiper delay, remote control, side view mirror, tinted glass, power steering, air conditioning, cruise control, adjustable steering wheels, power seats, power door lock, sunroof. That hasn't changed much. Air anti-lock brakes, etc. The cost of a gallon of gasoline since 1920 in hours of work, minutes you have to work, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And I know many of the stuff goes back 100 years. Here's a computer. It's even more. The cost has dropped even more to now. I couldn't figure out this one. And I couldn't see any legend explaining it. Maybe it's in the text. And the body, household ownership and use of products. You can see all of these are going up. I'm not sure what this is. Cellular phone. Okay, so it seems like everyone is much better off. So does the CPI, which tells us working families are worse off, is it telling us the truth or not? Okay, with that question, which I just did dwell on, and I said I couldn't answer yay or nay. I could argue both sides, and I did argue both sides. I'll leave you until I come back with topic 13.